Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having survived the rebuilding of the university and the making of the tramway to Port Dauphine. I think the lagging participants will join us in a few minutes. And on behalf of the president of the University Paris-Dauphine, I am very happy to welcome you for this conference organized around the question of the implementation of the DGA and the DA. So now we have a legal framework about a legal framework, since the DA is still under discussion, but we need now to implement this framework. Maybe a few words, and first I would like to thank and to underline the cooperative partnership we have had with Gaia-X in the organization of this event, and especially organized under the leadership of Hubert Tardieu. And also I'd like to thank my co-organizer, Jakob Rehof from the Gaia-X Institute. I would like also to thank all the speakers who accepted to share their analysis, expertise, and knowledge today with us. And I have a special thanks for Bert, Verdonck, and Eustache, who manage a specific survey in order to provide us with information from the field on the implementation of the DA and the DGA. Let me just briefly, for those of you who don't know what the University Dauphine is, the University Paris-Dauphine is, and PSL is, a few words about it. So the University Paris-Dauphine is a university specialized in organization sciences, which means that it's a mix of researchers and academics in management, economics, and other social science on the one hand, and people in mathematics and computer science on the other hand. And we are a founding member of this alliance among universities in Paris called PSL, for Paris Sciences et Lettres, who aims to be one of the main research university in France, and which is a kind of partnership among some other universities. And PSL is very much involved in the development of computer science and AI. It's a major hub in France for AI and data sciences. In this context, the governance and regulation chair, which I chair, is bringing together academics and practitioners who try to share their expertise on the political economy and institutional organization of regulation. And and the regulation for us, it's the way you try to articulate public policies with economic efficiency. And we have a lot of partners, both from the policy-making world. We have all the French regulators, for instance, with us, but also some other public institutions and a lot of industrial partners. And we are, of course, especially interested by the ecological transition and the digital transformation, which leads me to underline the fact that the chair is a member of an institute, a PSL institute called ACS, or for Applied Computational Social Science, which bring together data scientists and social scientists, and to try to make the best of this combination of science. So we are studying the regulation of AI and of the digital activities, but we are also, in a sense, practitioners, and we try to develop better research with the use on the basis of AI and social and data science in general. So let me, just before giving the floor to Jakob, give you a bit of perspective of why we organize this conference together with Gaia-X and Gaia-X Institute. It's very important from an economic perspective when we are dealing with this challenge of developing data sharing and data markets to consider, in fact, the fact that you need from the beginning to develop kick-off services or business cases that are sufficiently attractive to attract the different participants in an industry, in a value chain, etc., to reach a critical mass and a diversity of users. Then you can start developing a learning by doing process through which existing processes are first optimized, then reshaped, then sometimes innovative services can draw from this process of this evolutionary process. And of course, in this context, governance arrangement and technological solutions have also to be agile to guarantee, in fact, the evolution of the governance arrangement that are needed to basically ensure security and trust. This is why we are very much interested to this process, to this initiation of this process, and we are very happy to welcome you to this conference. And now I give the floor to Jakob Rehof.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thanks a lot to my colleagues, Martine Gaurier, yourself, Hubert, Tardieu, Joëlle Toledano, Bert Verdonck, Lucas Eustache, for the collaboration that I've had the great pleasure of having over more than 1 year now in the context of the Gaia-X Institute. Maybe from my end, just a few words on that. So the Gaia-X Institute is an independent think tank operating under the auspices of Gaia-X. That means it's not the same thing as Gaia-X, but it is, of course, inspired by topics that are important to Gaia-X, but the Gaia-X Institute wants to be an independent think tank in that context, and that is, it's a think tank devoted to strategic research on data exchange and the data economy, spanning a large scope, namely including both aspects of technology, economy, law, and regulation, as would be very important today, but even also all the way up to topics concerning civic and human rights in the context of digitalization and the data economy. So I welcome you all to our program today, and I hope it will not, and I'm sure it won't, be the last time we have a chance to meet on this interesting set of topics that I think are so vital to Europe and to values that we all share. So from my end, welcome, and thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Eric, again for helping with the organization.
Thank you very much, Jakob. And we will have two keynotes to introduce the conference delivered by, on the one hand, Franziska Brantner from the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action in Germany, and then by Jean-Michel Barrot, the Minister, Jean-Noël, sorry, Delegate for Digital Affairs at the Ministry of Economy. Unfortunately, both of them are not with us this morning because Jean-Noël Barrot is presenting today at the National Assembly the implementation legal act for the DSA, and Franziska Brantner was also unable to make it to Paris for just giving a 10 minutes talk at the beginning of a conference, but they kindly accepted to record videos. And so we will first start by Franziska Brantner.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to contribute a few words to your interesting event. I don't need to repeat to this audience why we need to create more value out of data in Europe. It is key for innovation, competitiveness, and our digital sovereignty. And it can help with the immense transformative processes that we're facing today. We have just successfully finished the negotiations on a Data Act, and a Data Governance Act was agreed on in 2022. With these acts, we now have a solid regulatory framework for a robust European data economy where data can be shared and used effectively. These legal acts aim to assure responsible data use as well as data provision and access to leverage its innovation potential. This, in turn, will contribute significantly to our data and digital sovereignty. The DGA, as initial legislative proposal under the EU data strategy, contributes to the European data economy by promoting trust in data intermediaries. It also enhances mechanisms for data sharing and utilization across the entire EU. The Data Act complements the DGA, and thanks to our joint efforts, the Data Act will also increase data availability and the responsible use of data. The regulation finally grants users access to the data they generate when using smart products and services. This can be the new basis for new innovative services and products. It therefore holds ample opportunities for both industry and SMEs, but also for end users. And while promoting data sharing, the Data Act also effectively protects trade secrets and thereby strengthens the European single market for data. On the practical side, there is Gaia-X. Germany and France have initiated this project together already in 2019. Our goal was to create an innovative European data ecosystem that enables the development of competitive and scalable data and AI applications. Gaia-X is an important element in the implementation of the new regulatory framework. It is an excellent opportunity today to discuss how Gaia-X and regulatory efforts go hand in hand, how Gaia-X can actually help to implement regulation. Gaia-X has already gone quite some steps. It has garnered large communities that take the spirit and the ideas even beyond its organizational boundaries. Technical results are there, and they are starting to be deployed on the ground. And we are, of course, looking forward to a broader market uptake during the coming years, that even more users apply what Gaia-X has developed. For Germany, especially small and medium enterprises are important to the economy, like in many other European countries too. Especially here, we find tremendous potential data sharing that has not been exploited yet. That is why we, via the German Gaia-X Hub, make special efforts to make Gaia-X known and apply to them. Also, important to mention the 11 Gaia-X use cases that Germany supports via public funding. They develop data spaces in the financial, automotive, maritime, public, and other sectors, or work on cross-sectoral solutions to connect clouds and data spaces. These are actual test beds to test and implement what, on the one hand, regulation provides for, and on the other hand, the solutions that Gaia-X has already developed. This concerns, for example, the architectural and policy framework or governance solutions. Some of these projects have already published quite important results that follow regulatory requirements and apply Gaia-X solutions. One of them is Eurodat. The aim of Eurodat is to establish a neutral data trustee in line with the EU Data Governance Act and to implement Gaia-X compatible use cases from the financial sector. The data trustee is intended to enable companies, academic institutions, public authorities to exchange data in a secure, legally compliant, and largely automatical manner. Another funding project that can help to implement the concept of data intermediary is Health-X Data Loft. With Health-X Data Loft, citizens will be empowered to provide, use, and control their own health data. The aim is to develop transparent, cloud-based applications in highly relevant areas of healthcare, all in accordance with the Gaia-X framework. To sum up, we are glad that with the new regulatory framework and the tools of Gaia-X, Europe can benefit from efforts that go hand in hand, and we are optimistic that this paves the ground for better and more data sharing in Europe. Above all, what is important is our sovereignty. Thank you.
Now, Jean-Noël Barrot.
Dear State Secretary Brantner, dear Professor Brousseau, dear Professor Rehof, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of the European industry, dear friends of the academic research community. I am very pleased to say a few words on behalf of the French government as an introduction to this conference. As you know, Europe has reached a major turning point in the implementation of its ambitious data strategy through the Data Governance Act and the very soon to be adopted Data Act, both regulations strongly supported by France under the impetus of Prime Minister Borne. These regulations represent a unique opportunity for the EU in general and for France in particular to truly enter the race for innovation as they pave the way for a harmonized framework for B2B, B2C and B2G data sharing, as well as better availability of public sector data. Trust, availability, competitivity and fairness are the keywords of this new innovation-driven framework, which will amplify the value generated by data. I can already mention a few examples of how deeply these regulations will impact stakeholders' activities. The Data Governance Act will enable data holders and data users to unlock the innovative potential of industrial data with the support of labeled and neutral intermediation services who can help them to build data marketplaces. On the side of research, academia will take advantage of a dedicated process to access a large range of specific public sector data, which will significantly improve the impact of our scientific research. Finally, and most importantly, the Data Act will put a final stop to unfair contractual terms in B2B data sharing partnerships, especially in relation to major big tech companies. This will simplify customers' everyday lives by removing financial barriers when choosing a new cloud service provider. In line with these regulations, the French government has initiated a bill to secure and regulate the digital space, currently under parliamentary review. With respect to the monitoring of intermediation services, the French government has opted for ARCEP, an authority which has an acknowledged practice of pro-investment and economic regulation. The challenge now is to ensure the effective implementation of these new rules. This will not be possible without the strong collaboration between data spaces and ARCEP in France, but also our vibrating European ecosystem spearheaded by Gaia-X that thrives to gather users and solution providers around this central idea of data sharing. Naturally, technology and service providers were the most interested at first. Our well-known European cloud service providers, but also small and large companies specialized in data such as Gaia-X, ClearUp and Amadeus to name a few. But they would have accomplished nothing without the investments and commitment of world-class users. And I'm happy to see that the automobile industry, which was most present at the beginning, has been joined by energy producers, transport and mobility businesses, and of course by the aerospace industry, with Catherine Gestin from Airbus being the new chairwoman of Gaia-X board. All this energy has been able to produce common deliverables from Gaia-X policy rules to the Gaia-X Federation services on which the European project Simple will be able to build. But also many concrete projects such as Ag Data Hub in the field of agri-food data, EONA-X, which is dedicated to transport and mobility data, Prometheus in the field of education, Omega-X, which is strongly supported by energy industry. More recently, we've launched together with Germany and the European industry a new initiative called Manufacturing X, which aims to develop cross-sectoral industrial data sharing. I hope to see the emergence of more transformating projects, especially for aeronautics and energy industry. In France, the community has been gathered and stimulated by the Hub France that has been supported by SIGREF, and I would like to thank his chairman, Jean-Claude Laroche, and also Henri Dagrin for their hard work. I'm happy to announce that we have recently funded the Data Space Lab that is being launched by IMT, and I'd like to thank Anne-Sophie Talandier, a well-known anchor of the Gaia-X community. This lab will be both a sandbox and a test bed to enable new projects to experiment data spaces and data sharing in a secured and controlled way. Finally, these new regulations, no matter how well-grounded and welcome they are, may represent for you legal and technical challenges that you're going to discuss today. But I know I can trust such a strong ecosystem to solve them quickly and easily. France will make sure, and we are counting on the activism of Gaia-X, that the European legal corpus for digital technology is a springboard for growth and the strategic autonomy of our single market. To this end, and to conclude, let me stress that the Franco-German cooperation is and will remain essential to an impactful implementation of our digital single market, leading to growth and progress for our co-citizens. President Macron and Chancellor Scholz will soon meet, and I count on you to maintain the great dynamics we've managed to create so far. I wish you all a pleasant panel.
So let me give the floor now to Hubert Tardieu, who will manage the first panel of this conference.
Thank you, Eric, and happy now to get into live after these very interesting videos. So let me introduce the panel which will start this day. Let me introduce first Professor Joëlle Toledano. Joëlle is an Emeritus Professor of Economics at Université Paris-Dauphine, and Joëlle has been part of the regulation of telecom for many years, so she knows how it works. When you have a regulation, you have to implement it. Jakob does not need to be presented, except I have to say he's a professor in the computer science in TU Dortmund, and he's a director of our Gaia-X Institute. Let me introduce as well Bert Verdonck. Bert is the CEO of the Luxembourg Data National Service, and Bert is also a board member of Gaia-X. So with these esteemed colleague, I would like to enter into the real of that discussion. So in November 2022, during the Gaia-X Summit, which was in Paris, we organized a panel about automated compliance in the context of the European Data Strategy Regulation. Since that time, as it has been mentioned by the two ministers, Data Governance Act is entering into force next week, and the Data Act has been adopted last June. Therefore, the question is not anymore which regulation do we need, but rather how to implement what has been agreed in the sharing of non-personal data. As always, and I'm sure many of you can raise that question, the question is which second is best, either launching data space first and regulating when we understand its business mechanism, or regulating first and tuning the regulation based upon experience of data spaces. You know that Europe has opted for the latter, and we all together need to get organized for promoting data spaces, and in the meantime, implementing the regulations with the necessary adjustment. Sure, we will hear a lot about that today. Today as well, I'm sure we will be speaking extensively of data intermediaries. The objective of the European data strategy, let me repeat that, cannot be met without data intermediaries. But we have learned in the B2C market the inherent dangers they are carrying, and Data Governance Act and Data Act are there to tame those dangers, if it is possible. But it is an interesting question I'm sure we will discuss today. In this first panel, and this is the way the full day has been organized, we wish to give you first an holistic view of the landscape. In order to better understand the context, the Gaia-X Institute has commissioned a survey conducted by the Chair, Governance and Regulation of Paris-Dauphine of 8 lighthouse projects. These are the data space which are absolutely now about to start, 2 which are in preparation. Those 10 lighthouse projects have been interrogated through a questionnaire, and the objective is to get their feedback about the new regulation. So what will be told to you today is very new, and it's a real vibrating industry reacting to the new regulation, and please wait to learn more about that. The main findings will be presented this afternoon, and Bert, who has been involved from Gaia-X side, can give us a first feedback of what you will learn this afternoon. Please, Bert.
Thank you, Hubert. Yeah, that is true. We've had a very lively discussion with several of these ongoing initiatives, which are in different stages of the development of their data spaces. But that gave us a very interesting insight in how people look into the value or the challenges that these new regulations bring. Myself, I'm also in Gaia-X coordinating the ecosystems. So those are about 15 now different domains in which we try to teach and to interact with these data space initiatives. So that gives already a very lively debate when we have our ecosystem coordination meetings. And then more specifically for this conference, we've entered into a structured questionnaire, a structured dialogue with them to uncover what is keeping them busy. So overall, I would summarize in 3 main takeaways from that study, and we will go into more details this afternoon. But first, many of these initiatives are working on their business case. What's the value driving their activities? Use cases are essential to understand and in order to drive and to scale these data sharing initiatives. All of these initiatives are somewhere on that path to scale, and that for sure is a challenge for all of them. How do you get traction? How do you get initial deployment, onboarding? How do you utilize the platform effects in the spaces where these initiatives are active? And here we're not talking about scaling in a B2C context only. Most of these initiatives are active in the B2B context, and that's also where we need to learn how these new initiatives can achieve scale. A second main takeaway is in the area of organization and governance. How do you organize such a collaborative, such a data sharing between sometimes very diverse partners? And that is where the discussion of the data intermediaries comes up. Do you need that independent party in the middle in order to balance out the unbalancing effects between dual-sided markets? So the value of the data intermediary is not taken for granted. That may very well depend on the characteristics of the industry, and we've seen many variations of how the concept of a data intermediary is adopted or even not chosen for. There clearly is not one size fits all in this governance domain. And then thirdly, of course, all of these initiatives realize that they need technology in order to manage and again to scale their initiative. This cannot be done with pencil and paper, not by taking up the phone, but you need much more tools in order to support these use cases. And the technology will depend on the type of use cases, the type of stakeholders, the type of data exchange that these participants are managing. Compliance, and of course the regulation is quite comprehensive, it sets a lot of conditions, is not always so simple. So it needs those tools in order to automate engaging into these initial contexts, staying compliant with the activities the participants do. And we also observed that many of the technologies and the tools are still in a conceptual phase. Let's be honest, the data space story is not that old, and collectively these initiatives are pioneering in that domain, in learning how these tools can be used in a balanced relationship between stakeholders, not to be hijacked by one monopolistic party, but really in a shared setting with a controlled and balanced governance between parties. That is where these initiatives are learning how to make the best technology choices, how they let them fit together in interoperable frameworks, not to solve it with a sector-specific isolated solution, but to solve it in a manner that will allow cross-sectoral exchanges in the future. We are not making our life necessarily easy, but we are putting a foundation in place in which those regulations can come to fruition and in an achievable and manageable pattern. So again, 3 takeaways: use cases, business cases, extremely important to understand. The role of the data intermediary needs to be further clarified and is very diverse, and the technology is to be selected and brought to scale and to maturity.
Thank you, Bert. So, implementing regulation, the first idea is, why don't we apply to digital as a medication what digital can deliver? This is automated compliance. Automated compliance is an essential way to establish trust between the participant to a data space. And European Commission is very keen, and you will hear that later on by Ivo Volman, to see how what is called compliance as code can be used for implementing regulation. What does it mean, typically, for those of you who are less prepared? It means that if a company said, I can guarantee that all my services are interoperable, it is not too complicated to think of a test bed to test that this interoperability in reality is working. Not very complicated, and for the user, big relief, because they know that someone else has stated that before them. But in the same way, and this is now explicitly written in the Data Act, there is an active promotion of smart contract. Jakob, you will explain this afternoon where we stand on this topic. Can you please set up the scene for automated compliance and smart contract?
Yes, thank you very much. I have the pleasure of looking at compliance as code and compliance automation from a computer science point of view, which is very interesting. And as I will explain in my talk later this afternoon, I believe that smart contracts and so-called ledger technology that is sort of underlying that idea is probably the single most important instrument we have at the moment to really help raise the level of compliance automation, in particular within the world of data spaces and data ecosystems. So let me try to say a little bit about that now. Smart contracts and distributed ledger technology was really introduced back in the 90s by Chabot, basically with the claim that the decentralized and distributed nature of ledgers would lead to the possibility of the elimination of the intermediary in business transactions. While that may still hold some promise, that's not the aspect that I'm going to focus on in my talk today. I am going to be more interested in the notion of smart contracts as something that really provides both the possibility of the automation of basic compliance relevant tasks, such as secure transaction logging, the automatic creation of an electronic archive of what happened in a transaction. That is relevant for compliance-related tasks. It offers also the notion of smart contracts from a software technological standpoint, something interesting, namely, it offers sort of a place for identifiable and delimited components that can act as targets for testing and certification of key compliance-related properties, such as, for example, security, functional correctness, or interoperability. And I'm going to stress a little bit later today that from a software technology standpoint, that's a bigger thing than it might seem. This idea that with smart contracts, you have the possibility of having sort of like a well-defined area of the software systems we're talking about that really contains the compliant relevant features. That may not seem to you, if you're not a computer scientist, as something big, but anything you want to try to automate with software is always already a problem, because in most software systems it's incredibly difficult to even identify which parts of the code are even relevant to checking compliance. And the idea of smart contracts, I think, brings a possible solution to that problem. In short, I think the notion of smart contracts offers a basic hook for automated compliance by design, as I'm going to call it. Now, I mentioned that the promise is particularly great, probably in the context of data spaces and data ecosystems. And that has to do with the fact that here there is the possibility of sharing resources and technology, also compliance automation technology, related to smart contracts and their certification. And so that brings economy of scale, it brings cost sharing and other advantages to the fore. And smart contract technology in that context also could be a natural target for standardization. Now, finally, in the European context, Europe is actually doing pioneering acts in terms of regulating sort of general software-intensive systems, while we have seen that maybe in vertical specialized areas hitherto. It's sort of new that the legislator is actually trying to prescribe properties for more general business-related software. As a computer scientist, I find that interesting, and I also welcome that in principle. So we're talking about regulating here in a pioneering way areas that have hitherto largely been unregulated. In particular, it's significant to me as a computer scientist to see how the Data Act in its Article 30, as Hubert already mentioned, significantly promotes smart contract technology for data sharing. Now, I'm going to stress that Article 30 is not about smart contract technology in general. It is particularly about smart contract technology in the service of data sharing. And at the same time, it makes some rather direct requirements on that technology regarding security, functional correctness, and logging. In order to implement that, I believe that there is also pioneering technology to be developed in order to help automate compliance checking from that perspective. That also means that it's a great opportunity for Europe to try to really take a leadership role in the technological support of compliance. And it is my hope that we can contribute towards that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. In the implementation of the new regulation for non-personal data, we shall necessarily have specific context. They can depend on the market, for instance, in regulated market as health, finance, or aeronautics. But we will have also the bodies to implement data regulation. Jean-Noël Barrot just told us it will be ARCEP in France. Those national bodies, 27 of them, will have different interpretation of DGA and DA. That's for sure. Joëlle, you have been a former regulator for telecom in France. Can you give us your view how to cope with this double diversity while learning from the experience of the first data space?
Thank you, Hubert. And maybe just to begin,
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, by a little provocative sentence. My feeling is that the organization of digital regulation in Europe and its implementation had not been thought through the same rigor as objective. The objective we heard just before, innovation, competitivity, contestability, fair practice, data sharing, let's say, privacy, security. But in fact, except for competition issues, the Commission has little practice in directly enforcing its regulatory powers. Often, once it has laid down the rules, in agreement with Parliament and Member States, Commission monitors ex post the action and governance of the Member States without exercising its responsibilities directly. It can't be the case anymore with digital technology, because regulation of the most powerful players is only likely to be implemented in force if Europe's full weight is brought to bear, and therefore if the regulator is European, not local. However, when it comes to being as close as possible to the market and encouraging the development of innovation, centralized action alone is unlikely to be effective. So digital regulation will only work with these two dimensions, and for the moment, it hasn't been designed that way. In a very Cartesian approach, a French one, let me say, to breaking down the problems associated with the new digital civilization, we have a dozen or so texts that have been or will be adopted during the current terms. We all know the kick names: DMA, DSA, DGA, DA, EA Act, let's say cyber issues. So, and in addition to platforms that regulate data, it's possible sharing, security, cyber counterparts, artificial intelligence, etc. Issues by issues, the preservation of fundamental rights and the encouragement of innovation and competition in the European digital market are central objectives. But these texts suffer from a lack of harmonization and an overall approach of their governance. They neglect any trade-off between public and policy objectives. This is the case with the regulation for digital market and platforms and service, as the problem, in fact, of moderation or problems of online sales that are dealt with DSA were not linked to abusive economic practice, and they are dealt with DMA. I'm sure that we'll be involved in the future, but just until now, it's two different regulations. The same risk applies to data. Data is a central issue in the digital world. Access to and use of data is the subject of around half a dozen of regulation and has many different objectives. We heard about ARCEP, but we have also protection of personal data, protection of public holders, protection against monopolization more in DMA, fair sharing with DGA, altruist sharing with CNIL. I am speaking about France, but it's only the derivation of the European model. It's not a problem specifically in France. We have the issue of governance of players, transparency of use, and just until now, they are supposed to be enforced by almost as many national regulators, and without European regulation. My point is that a global vision of a dynamic European data policy that respects privacy is now needed. SMEs are likely to struggle if they must implement this objective on their own. Data incubators, sort of structures that facilitate the sharing and reasoned use of data to help them, would be preferable to a proliferation of watchdog. Depending on the case, they could be, as you told us before, sectoral or national. In my opinion, the next European term of office should rethink the organization of the governance for digital regulation in general and data regulation in particular. We need effective and incitative regulation for data sharing, and as we heard yet, one size doesn't fit all.
Thank you, Joëlle, for this provocative statement, and it gives some work for the next commission. They have not finished, obviously. To give you a full holistic view of what we will be discussing today, let me go into something complementary to that. In the invitation to this conference, we wrote, the way value is created and distributed through data sharing and the way costs are shared are also essential dimension of the arrangement governing digital ecosystem with significant impact on value creation by the model as well as their sustainability and the competitivity of the involved stakeholder. Bert was mentioning the fact that use cases describing precisely the benefit have absolutely to be understood by all the partners. We know that in the personal data market, it has been very well explained through the network effect, and we know that it has been explained that if you do not reach a critical side for each side of the market, the condition for takeoff will not be met. And so what I would like in the last 10 minutes of this panel, I would like to ask the three panelists, how do you see these elements of network effect, which are to be implemented, as Bert mentioned it? How do you see that as a condition for takeoff? How do you see, in a few words, the dynamic of data sharing to operate for non-personal data? I believe we pretty well understand how it works for personal data with the work of multi-sided market, but how will it work in the work of non-personal data? Bert, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you. So, as I said, one size doesn't fit. There is a lot of variation, as we have observed. There's a large diversity of patterns. We do not see a single dynamic in how this can be brought to scale, but scale matters. In big data, big is an important word, and we see that so far many initiatives have not reached the scale that allows them to create impact, especially not in the non-personal data area. But achieving scale, volume of transactions, the amount of followers, the amount of participants is not easy. And it requires many things. It requires optimal market knowledge, understanding customers, consumers, market drivers, getting organized. Some initiatives fail because they don't uncover how governance could be defined and brought to practice. Use cases are key. Investments are crucial to overcome the initial fixed costs, which are large. You don't get from scale 0 to 1 million of adopters without that initial subsidy or that initial investment. And tools are required to support the entire process, from customer acquisition, onboarding, managing the contract, managing compliance, while the use cases and the technology are continuously evolving. So it's not that this is a very static, seasonal type of market. This is a continuously evolving digital application space. And in this context, fragmentation is killing, harmonization is key, and interoperability is essential. So I think those are at least the initial sketch of the multidimensionality of that problem of how you can create scale.
Jakob, your view.
Yes, again, coming sort of from the more technology-driven view, computing view, maybe, it's already been mentioned several times by Bert and others that the business cases around data sharing, of course, are going to be like maybe the really major component in driving this forward. But again, coming from sort of the technology view, I would add today that there's a huge drive coming from the area of AI-based applications. It's really only, I think, after the inception of the data space initiatives that we have really seen this enormous explosion that we currently witness in the interest and perception of the transforming power of AI-based applications and AI technology. And my point is this: if one thing is certain, you can discuss, and that's an interesting discussion you can have, where does that all lead? What is real about it? Is it hype? How much of it is hype? It's clear that it's not just hype. It's clear that there is something very transformative going on with this new way of AI technology. But if one thing is clear, it is this, that AI feeds on mass data. And that means that if we want to be able to keep up in that arms race of technology, we will need to ramp up on our ability to build up data and to use data and to share data. So that's a more kind of technology-driven basic consideration. That does not in and of itself identify exactly the business cases that are needed, but it is an enormous economic driver towards their coming into existence, I think. And so that would be sort of my main point in that area.
Thank you, Jakob. Joëlle, would you like to give us your view?
Just maybe it's difficult to have other ideas after my two colleagues. Just maybe add something about before business case, that for sure are needed. The problem is to have a lot of use case. Because, in fact, the main issue is that sharing data before using it, you don't really know what you could get with. So the first thing is to be able to have more and more use case. And it's the reason why I think at the economic level, if we want to have this basic point, it's important for the small and middle companies, not the big one that can share the fixed cost, but to have the fixed cost put on the table as in France, it's going we are going to have something. It's very important just to push use case on all the way, and then for that, after, we will have business case.
The intention of this first panel was to give you various dimensions of the problem we will be addressing all the day through. I would like now to open for questions from the audience. Please, if you want to ask a question, raise your hand and then you push the button, which is with the small guy having some Bluetooth vibration out of his mouth.
Thank you, Hubert. Yes, Boris Otto, Fraunhofer, and also TU Dortmund University. I would like to second a little bit what Joëlle just said, because I think that's really a challenge that we need to overcome, because out of all these use cases would not necessarily evolve the data sharing infrastructure that we need. And you posed the question rightly, who is in the end then the one who pays for it, right? It's like in a pizzeria, you have to build the oven first before you can sell the first pizza, right? And that is a problem that we all need to overcome, I believe, and I think that should also focus us in the upcoming, let's say, adoption and scale-up phases. So at this point, I think it's really, really relevant.
Thank you, Boris. There was a question over there. Introduce yourself.
My name is Dennis Berto from Groupement Français des Industries de l'Information, and focusing about making data as a market, which is complex. It's there's an ambiguity about the data. As long as you don't know what the data are, you cannot imagine what you can do with them. But if you see them, that means that somebody made a lot of investment to make them available. Their cost behind data. They are not coming up by, as a gift. You need to work on them, and you have to build a commercial project about them. Will you sell them? Will you give them for free? Is it a power that you gave yourself to share data with other companies, with competitors, depending? So that data is a strategy, and strategy needs investment. And if you make investment, then you have to choose the good data that you will provide outside of your organization. Thank you.
Maybe it is not an answer, but an illustration of what you said. I was attending about 3 years ago a conference about satellite and the use of satellite. And the people of Copernicus were explaining that they have spent billions of euros to make a satellite fleet which was able to photograph what was going on Earth every 40 minutes. And they said typically, for instance, if we have fire or forest, that will be very, very good. And they said, because it is so important, we will give those data for free. I was next to me, a guy coming from Greece, and he said, but what can we do with 40-minute snapshot that is not useful? If we do not mix ground data, which are taken in real time, with those 40 minutes snapshot, we will get nothing. Meaning that when Joëlle or Boris are mentioning use cases, they want to see inherent to the use cases how this sharing of data will make the difference. And I believe giving the Copernicus data for free was by no means a way to attract use cases. It was simply facilitating some startup coming from the other side of the ocean to make money out of our taxpayer effort. Okay, that was simply an illustration to your point. Any other question you would like to raise? Yes?
Hi, my name is Pierre, Chief Technical Officer at Gaia-X. Thank you very much for the talk this morning. That was very interesting. When we talk about data exchange, we also talk about the exchange, so meaning that there is a transaction. A transaction requires usually to have a contract. And my question is the following one. In considering that we have no common civil law in Europe, what is the role of the contract and the contractualization, the process, maybe the automation or the supervising of contracting in the data exchange?
I will hand over to Jakob, because this is a very difficult question, which is supposed to be sorted out in Article 30 of Data Act by smart contract. Okay, so Jakob, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that question. So let's see. You know, there's this joke about smart contracts that I'm sure you've heard. I should say for anybody who didn't catch that, Pierre Grandier is the CTO of Gaia-X and plays a significant role in the construction of the whole thing. So the joke that I'm sure you've also heard, Pierre, is that smart contracts are neither smart nor are they contracts. Okay, so I'll actually explain, just to get you even more interested in my talk this afternoon, what the resolution of that paradox is, okay? I have an answer to that. But one thing which is clear is that smart contracts in and of themselves are not legal contracts, that's clear. I mean, the basic drift of it is that they can be used as an important technological instrument to implement at least certain parts of something which is a contract. Now, that something which is a contract cannot be generally eliminated, and that something which is a contract in the legal sense may very well have to, let's just say, still reside on paper for some definition of what it means to reside on paper. I will not exclude that it has the form of a PDF document these days, but it's still paperwork compared to what we're talking about when we talk about automated smart contracts. So in short, contracting and contract law in particular, and the alignment and the understanding of what that means vis-a-vis those regulations that we're talking about is not something that you can eliminate just by using the concept of smart contract. Absolutely not. But on the other hand, it can help. Does that satisfy you?
No, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been studying contract, and in the international context, there is no problem in a sense that because the parties choose a jurisdiction of reference with a court, and so so this is not a big deal, especially in the context of the European Union, because even if you have different legal frameworks, you have a convergence of framework, especially in the domain of trade and many others. So this is not the largest issue there. The largest issue is really the business cases and the users cases and the technology behind that and the incentive to join those initiatives.
Amal, you are willing to ask a question.
No, actually. No, but more seriously, I was just about to do exactly the same remark as Eric. Of course, there is one civil law, one contract law in each member state of the European Union, but God knows we've been doing transnational contracts for years, if not centuries. And also, European law provides directives regarding the way issue regarding jurisdiction or legal framework to be applied can be resolved in an easy way. I would agree with Eric that it goes to the actual use case. How is it going to benefit me or my business model to access the data, to share the data, to get it? But it's also another thing that will have an impact, which is the actual bargaining power of the parties that are engaging into a contract. And this is nothing new. Maybe data sharing spaces are going to slightly move that, for instance, by creating or easing cooperation of smaller entities into negotiating with bigger ones. But in a certain way, things are already settled. For instance, in the Data Act, in B2B, in data sharing, it's either B2B or B2C. If it is B2B, it's common law, contract law, negotiations, possible actions in front of judges. If it is B2C, the consumer is protected by a very strong legal framework that protects the consumers in Europe. So it will be a case by case. I think it's not that problematic in a certain way.
So you have just Amal Taleb, Director of Public Affairs of SAP. And Amal, you will have plenty of time later on to express your view. Any other question or comments for this first panel? Yes?
Yeah, Fritz Henglein, University of Copenhagen, and Head of Research of Dion Digital, working in smart contracts and DLT. So the Data Act is using the term data sharing, and that's a little bit disconcerting, I have to say, because you could say the idea of sharing data, the actual data that are out there, public data, that's gone. You know, large language models and image generation, video generation. We'll see all these things coming from. The interesting thing is, like, you know, confidential data, and they will not be shared. I mean, they will just not be shared. But the interesting part would be actually, how does the Data Act, the DGA, also address the sharing of the results of providing information? So, for example, how's this addressed so that companies and private people can contribute en masse their information, private healthcare information, in order to get good prediction of actually, cancer rates and all these things. And there's techniques and technologies, and I'm sure Jakob will mention a couple of those later on, that make these absolutely viable and possible, today.
Thank you. Any other, Boris, yes.
Yes, very good point that Fritz made, because I think we need to bring some clarity into the landscape of what we mean when we talk about sharing, but also when we talk about the available technologies that allow for the different kinds of, let's say, utilizing third-party data. Because as Fritz said, I mean, it's not necessarily always the case that the data, let's say, moves to a third party, but it could be the other way around, let's say, following this notion of compute to data. Also, the data resides where it is and basically receives, so to say, an algorithm to process the data on site. Saying that also brings me to, in fact, and Fritz mentioned that also, what Jakob is researching on, what kind of, let's say, technology do we have available in order to address these different scenarios when we talk about making data available for reuse by other parties? And in the end, I think that would give some clarity for the data space initiatives. And a closing remark to my point here is, I recently heard some nice notion when somebody at a similar conference referred to what we're talking about as, well, data moves at the speed of trust. And I think that is something what I like very much, because it conveys the message, so to say. But now it's up to us to basically define, let's say, well, patterns, how to, well, make this claim happen, right? Thank you.
Okay, a few last questions, if any, or comments. Yes, I guess you want. So let me simply conclude this panel. The objective of these 45 minutes was to give you a picture of a multifaceted issue and to prepare yourself mentally to listen to European Commission and Ivo Wollmann. Ivo has been the guy who has coordinated the writing of all these data, DGA, and so on. So we have managed with Eric and Jakob to give you plenty of time after Ivo's presentation. Obviously, he's coming with a new baby, and a new baby is always beautiful, okay? But he knows he has a pretty big challenge in front of him, and let's see how he sees this implementation. But we have been working with him, I would say, regularly by conference call, and he attended last year our summit, and he said his immense interest for automated compliance. So it's simply to bring your brain ready for those discussions, ready for the discussion with Boris, who will explain to us how research is working, ready to listen to Amal, who is coming with a little bit of strong statement about how SAP sees these difficult days to come later. Thank you.
Thank you, Hubert. If I may just add to that on the intervention by Ivo Wollmann, as Hubert said, he's been deeply involved in the creation on the part of the European Commission of these regulatory pieces of work. And I just wanted to bring it close to you that this is a unique occasion for anyone in the audience to directly interact with someone who is really centrally placed in the data directorate in the EU Commission. And it's not every day that one gets to interact directly with sort of the heart of the regulatory body. So my pledge to you is when you go to the coffee break here, you should really think about what might be on your mind in terms of questions or comments to someone like Ivo Wollmann, because again, it's really not a chance that we have every day to offer that opportunity. And I'd really like to see a discussion with Ivo and the audience as well. So Please bear that in mind. Thank you.